Have you ever thought about what you did last summer? Yeah, you better. You better right now. Right now. If it was something bad, ooh, you're in trouble now. If you didn't do anything, then that's fine. I didn't do anything bad last summer. So, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of the FVI, where I talk about the first volume or a one-shot of a manga, and I give you my first impressions, as the name suggests, and whether or not it is a good first volume or a good one-shot, and if you should check it out or not. So, today is going to be interesting, because this is a manga that I've seen like almost zero people talk about. Actually, zero people I've seen talk about it, so even less than one. So, am I the first person to talk about it? Probably not. But I like to think that, to bring light to this interesting volume of manga that I have picked up. So, let's get started right now. Alrighty, so finding information on this manga was proven to be more difficult than I ever expected it to be, considering that it's from a huge publication here in English. But yeah, finding information about it is like very difficult, and so let's get started. This was first published in October of 2007 by the one, the only Viz Media. And there's not much else I can say about it, but here it is. This is Portus, or Portus. I don't know how to pronounce it, but this is by Jun Abe. And we have some information here for you. English adaptation is by Kelly Sue DeConnick. The translation is by Kenichiro Yagi. Touch-up art and lettering is by Gia Kamluk. Design is by Sam Ellsway, and editor is Kit Fox. So yeah, that's going to be all the information I have for the English translation, but let's get started right into the cover and spine. This cover is super cool. So it's kind of hard to see, but it's got like the raised information or content or whatever you want to call it, with a really creepy like font for the use for the title, and like just an absolutely terrifying cover in general, with like a mix between like realistic or actual images, and then of course like drawn art by Jun Abe. And then on the back is a picture of a girl, which is the main character, but not much else information that can be added. And of course, you know, you have your thing that describes the entire book. Overall, this is a pretty cool like cover and spine. I really like the spine a lot, actually. It's just this really creepy dude who's like staring at you at all times. So it is very scary on the bookshelf. So, going into the characters, we have two characters that I'm going to talk about, because there's really only two characters to that have enough information, I would say, without spoiling the story. So the first one is going to be our character here. Her name is Kawakami Asami, or Asami Kawakami. She is the main character, and yeah, she's overall just like a fairly normal character. Nothing too special about her. Clearly has some emotional things happen throughout the story that affect her negatively, and I would say semi-positively. It's genuinely, her character growth is very interesting, and keeps you on your toes. And then the other character is Keigo, who is the art teacher, which, let me find, okay, there we go, Keigo Sawa, right here, perfect. So he's basically a mentor to the main character. He's pretty cool, pretty neat, very kind, likes to talk to his students and really cares about them, from what I could tell, at least from the story. And overall, I like his growth throughout the story as well. He actually has a very nice like ending, I would say. He does not pass away, so just keep that in mind. I guess that's a mild spoiler, but yeah, I like what he does for his students. He's not a creep. He's super cool and very nice. So let's get into the story. So the story is actually probably the best part, or mostly the best part. You'll see as I talk about it. But so Portus in this story is a game where there's a special hidden level that if you make it to it, there's supposedly a monster or a boy that shows up, and the boy asks you a question, and if you say yes, then you die. So so as the name suggests, somebody finds the game, who happens to be the best friend of the main character, and this person plays it, says, does what she's not supposed to, and then passes away. So it's about basically the main character, Kawakami, trying to find out what happened to her best friend and what this game is, with the help of her art teacher and then another professor later in the story. So overall, the story is actually pretty interesting. Like, it definitely keeps you thinking throughout most of it. It does get a little weird towards the middle, I will say. I think like the premise starts to get a little odd in terms of how the game came to be. And then I think the ending, in my opinion, is very rushed. I don't really like how the story ends. It's like kind of a cliffhanger, but it doesn't make any sense because of just how the story has been built and been running along. So it like kind of frustrated me towards the end. That will make more sense if you've read it, but I'm not going to spoil it here. But yeah, if you are going to read this, just know that the ending may or may not bother you because it just doesn't have any closure. It doesn't really make you feel good about it. It just kind of feels like, oh, I read this whole thing and like this ending kind of makes like the read not as fun, I would say. I think that's the best way to put it without, spoiling it. But yeah, so overall, the story's interesting. It's an interesting premise. Just the execution could have probably been a little bit better. But now that we're done talking about the characters and story, let's move on to the art. Alright, so let's talk about the art of Portus, or Portus. So it's like got like a semi like realistic style. The shading is very strong, very heavily up on the faces and stuff like that. And it really adds to the creepiness factor of this entire story. So it definitely works to its favor. I will say though, there are parts where there are characters like that just, will look a certain direction and you're like, oh boy, you can tell that the artist was still figuring out how to draw characters and humans because like there are definitely some very wonky perspectives, especially with the facial expressions and directions. To try not to spoil it too much, so I'm just going to show you some of it. But sometimes the characters get a little too realistic for my taste. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically like, I don't know, there's something that's like fun about reading. Like this, I think this is a great example. Like this is a really creepy face, but I think it's just drawn in such a way that it's a weird perspective. Coming in from like an art background, like the lips are just like weirdly visible in comparison to the rest of the face, especially because this is supposed to be like a mostly side profile, but we can see almost her entire lip, so it's really weird. It's like almost like her face is like kind of like twisted, which I mean I guess plays into the story, but yeah, definitely not my favorite in terms of character stuff. But in terms of the horror aspects, oh my goodness, there's a lot of really terrifying horror stuff that goes on here. The surreal imagery is disgusting. It's nasty. Will make you feel a little bit sick to your stomach if you love that kind of stuff. You like that really gross, grotesque horror. This is totally up your alley because like there's a lot of really creepy stuff that happens in this. I will say, as a very extremely important matter, there are a ton of I would say triggering things that occur within this manga. I'll throw them up right now on the screen to show you exactly what you're going to expect if you're going to read this, because it is a lot, and it was a lot for me reading this. And I'm not like easily triggered by things, but like there were a lot of things. It's just like, wow, that was extremely graphic, and I don't necessarily think it really helped to push the story anywhere per se. Like it felt like it was grotesque and disgusting for grotesque and disgusting sake, not for like a story plot or like point. So that kind of bothered me a bit, but yeah, just as a note, there's going to be a lot, so please keep that in mind. But overall, the art is probably one of the better parts of this story, and yeah, a lot of it plays perfectly to that kind of horror, that grotesque nastiness. If you like that stuff, then yeah, definitely check it out. So, final thoughts. This was very okay. I'm neither here nor there on it. I think like it's an interesting read, but I definitely wouldn't suggest it to everybody. I think it's could have been better in a lot of places. I think the horror aspects are okay, but the horror aspects are great, but it doesn't feel like they're connected to the story too well. Like it seems like there's a disconnect between the story and the art. It's weird. I don't know how else to explain it other than you should probably just read it, but it just feels like a lot of the things that occur within the manga just don't make a lot of sense in terms of like story beats or in terms of the art as well. So as much as I love the surreal imagery and like the horror stuff and the horror aspects, a lot of them don't seem to truly make sense. Like, yeah, you're supposed to suspend your disbelief when it comes to fiction, but this one was like really stretching. It was a real stretch for me to be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense in this world. So yeah, would I suggest to read this? If you like horror manga, sure. But if you know, for any other reason, I think you can skip it. I think there are better horror series by a variety of artists, especially now with a lot of mangaka or a lot of horror mangaka being published in English. I think you have a better chance of reading something better from one of them than giving this a shot, because yeah, it was pretty rough. So, have you read this? If you have, please leave your comments below and let me know how you feel about it, because clearly I have a fairly mixed reception about it, but I'm really curious if someone else has actually read this and if they have an opinion on it. So if you do, please leave that in the comments below. And you know what to do. You can like, comment, and you can subscribe. You can't favorite anymore. I guess that's not a thing on YouTube, so I should stop saying that. But yeah, I would appreciate it if you did all those things, and if you have already, awesome, you are amazing. And if you haven't done any of those things and you don't want to, that's okay. If you made it to this part, that means you watched about 10 minutes of me talking. So I appreciate it. Your views mean a lot. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode of the Spooky FVI, and I will see you in the next episode.